picture. I could have called that.
Easy, right? I thought about it on Friday, I thought about it on Saturday,
Yeah.
and I said, okay. And then Sunday, I was still like, I got up around 5:30, 6 o'clock.
Yeah.
I thought, should I still do it? Nah, no. So I didn't do it.
Not super, any other Sunday maybe, Super Bowl Sunday, no way.
Yeah. But I did go for a quick 3-mile hike up in PV.
Oh, nice.
So that was pretty cool.
On Sunday?
Mhm.
Oh, nice.
Sunday morning, yeah.
Well done.
Yeah, so did my activity, got a little ray and sun in my face, so it was really nice.
Oh, I need to do that, I'm so pissed.
All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. I mean, surprise, surprise. If it's 1 or 100 agents, I will still post this. So thanks again for being here. We're going to be talking about the skill sets of negotiations. Fun, right? For me, I love to teach negotiations because I believe that I'm pretty good at negotiating. And it's really a finesse, what it really boils down to. It's looking at it from 2 different perspectives. One, the win-win of everyone. You know, most agents really think about their client and themselves. But in essence, that's where you fall short. But when you look at it from 2 different views, from the buy side and from the sell side, guess what? You'll have a more greater opportunity to close the deal, fill in those gaps, and ultimately get paid a commission. So let me get started. The elements of negotiations. So I'm going to try to make it as exciting as possible. You know, it is a little bit of dry material, but in essence, you know, this is part of what we do on a regular basis. Congratulations, Kevin. I heard you won. So what are we focusing on today? Okay, so we know that growing your business and running a business is crucial, right? Lead generating for buyers and sellers, make seller listing presentations, get listings, make buyer presentations, get listings, and then obviously part of our process is previewing real estate as well. Every week we do broker tours, right? To go look at what's out there. You should be consistently going on the MLS and looking at inventory, right? What's active, what's coming on the market, coming soon. That gives you a perspective that if a buyer comes in, guess what? You have a potential property that you can say, hey, I found, or I have a property that I previewed last week that might hit all the bells and whistles. So in essence, that's really growing your business. Now, running a business is a total dynamics, okay? Because that's really what the uncomfortable aspect of it is. The things we don't like to do, okay? Marketing, showing houses, right? How many times do we go driving around looking at properties and showing the clients, and you know, every property you show, it's not the right fit. I always believe on the 3 aspects, the house being cold, the house being warm, or the house being super hot. Have you ever experienced that? It's similar to real estate as well when you are actually interviewing, is when you start showing properties, the client will tell you, yeah, you know what, this house just feels a little cold for me. Doesn't hit all the bells and whistles. Then there's houses that it's warm, it hits some of the bells and whistles, but something about this house that I'm still not 100% sure I want to submit an offer. And then as soon as they walk into that hot house, all the bells and whistles, right? And they say, yeah, this is the house. There's something about this house that we want to submit an offer. So those are the 3 aspects of running a business and really the elements of negotiations. Transaction management is also part of the flow of a real estate transaction. And if I have time, I will show you the process. I think I gave you the flow chart, remember?
Yeah, the flow chart.
Yeah, and giving you the process of a buyer and the process of a seller. Obviously, part of negotiations is having your vendors, your team, you know, what are the set goals as well. And then the most important, how I think, is the compliance, okay? Be very compliant because you don't want to take shortcuts, right? You want to make sure that you follow a checklist, a map that will lead you to a closed transaction, get paid, and ultimately everyone is happy. And then, most important is the training and the coaching that leads to, closing more deals. Any questions? All right. So let's consider some of the positions as a buyer and a seller, okay? And it doesn't matter who you represent, if it's the buyer or the seller. How can your ability to negotiate affect the outcome of the deal? Think about that for 1 minute, okay? There's so many issues that can transpire, right? Walls that we hit. But as a professional that you are, how do you navigate that to ultimately close the deal? Because that's the number one goal, is for the buyer to close the deal, handle the keys, congratulations. Or the seller, right? Ultimately selling the property for the highest possible price with the least amount of headaches so they can net the most possible. What are some of the ways that you can negotiate in your everyday life, right? We're constantly negotiating, in my opinion. Every single day should be negotiations, even outside of real estate. Think about, your family too. I remember my sister was always constantly growing up, would always bargain and try to negotiate with me because she wanted something. So she said, Simon, can you get me this? And I'll do this. So she was always playing the negotiations, right? What are the skills that great negotiators possess, right? Again, it's the finesse of riding that wave to get to the finish line. Why is asking questions very important? What do you think? Ask a lot of questions because it'll get to the core of what the answer can be. If you're a good listener, believe me, you'll get the skill set and the negotiation in place. All right, so activities and brainstorming. We're not going to go too deep into it, but here are some of the most common things that we come. Price, terms, and conditions, all right? Let's say that we are going on a listing appointment. And the three things that are going to come up all the time is, what the price is, what are the terms, and then ultimately, what is the commission going to look like? So if you can at least handle those objections, guess what? You'll be able to negotiate what you believe is fair for you, but ultimately the bigger picture of getting the listing. So price. Sellers always think that their house is worth $10 million. They're always going to think that. My house is worth $10 million. And you say, well, why do you believe that? Well, because Zillow says so. Well, tell Zillow to actually go out and give you a proposal in writing. Okay, they don't know all the elements, right, to the actual house. Have they physically looked at the property, the condition of the property? What upgrades have you done? This is where you come in as a professional to ask those right questions. Then terms, right? If you can answer those terms, well, the seller may say, I do not want to give you 6 months, but I only want to give you 30 days to sell my house. How do you handle that objection, right? It's your finesse and your ability to negotiate that and say, well, the reason, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, that I need a minimum of 6 months is because there's no guarantee that the buyer will close the deal. The buyer has to do their due diligence, do the initial process. The buyer has to obtain a loan. The buyer still has to get an appraisal. The buyer may want to do some type of request of repairs. And if none of those align, then the deal falls apart. We're back to square one. Okay, does that make sense? So this is the reason, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, we need extra time, because just in case this buyer doesn't go through. And I've seen it firsthand where one buyer goes in, cancels. Second buyer goes in, cancels. Third buyer goes in, finally, we close the deal, everyone gets paid. And then last but not least is the commission. Well, what do you charge, Simon? Ooh, why do agents feel really nervous when it comes to the commission?
Because
Yeah.
you can be uncomfortable.
Very-
Uncomfortable conversation to have when it's about your own income and your own money.
Yeah, it's your self-worth, right? Think about that for a minute. On $1 million listing, 6% total commission, that's a pretty substantial amount of money that you're about to make. Even if you split it, right, 50-50, 3% to the listing side, 3% to the buy side, that's still a lot of money. That's 30,000. For the same process, if you were doing a $100,000 listing, okay, that's where agents get a little bit nervous. It's like, oh, how do I handle that? You know, the commission aspect of an objection from a seller. Well, obviously, you know, one is their skill set, right, to know how to handle that objection, but more so your confidence. How confident are you in earning what you're earning? Okay, you're a professional at the end of the day. Try to negotiate that with an attorney. Go to an attorney and you need someone to represent you. Minimum is 40%. Okay, ask them, are you willing to negotiate that and only get, you know, 20%? They probably will say, go pound some sand. You know, attorneys work in the professional. Why are we not any different? Think about that for a minute. You know, look at the big picture, but more so, you are a professional providing good service, right? The aspect of, are you either a Walmart or a Nordstrom's? I want to be the Nordstrom's. Someone says, I don't want to be Nordstrom's. I said, okay. She says, I want to be, Saks Fifth Avenue. I said, okay, yeah, that's a tier above, but it's really the relationship and more so the customer experience, right? What are you providing that is giving you the worth of your commission, you know? And you can break it into two segues, you know? How I approach it in my own personal listing appointments is, and I think I've shared this in the past, you know, when a seller says, you know, well, how much are you going to charge? I say, well, I try to lock in my own personal commission first. Well, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I charge just 3% of the sales price of the list price, right? The question here, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, what are we going to compensate the buyer's agent if they bring in a ready, willing, and able buyer? Typically, it's around 2.5%. So what am I doing right now is securing my commission of 3%. Does that make sense? And then I'm securing the reasoning why the compensation to the cooperating brokerage and the agent, which is the average of 2.5% for a total of 5.5%. And if you really see it that way. Now, again, it's all dialogue. It's all body language, right? But more so, are you controlling the conversation or is the seller controlling the conversation? Because I can tell you, if the seller is controlling the conversation, most likely you're not going to get the listings, you're not going to get the terms that are favorable to you, and you're going to end up losing. Okay, we're winners here, right? Okay, any questions regarding price, terms, and condition? Yes, ma'am.
Do we know how Zillow is coming to the conclusion that they are on this estimate so that we have that in our knowledge bank to go ahead and combat that?
Yeah, very good question. Well, they use a lot of the information through the multiple listing service. It's an algorithm, right? That they generate, you know, activity on the MLS, activity with the county recorders. Now, I would say study it as well. When you're actually going on a listing appointment, you should be doing your homework, right? First and foremost, make sure that you give yourself enough time to prepare for the listing appointment and make sure that you're doing any and all data gathering, meaning you're going to go on the multiple listing service, you're going to go on the county recorders, you're going to look at Zillow as an example and see comparisons. Because at the end of the day, it's not what Zillow, it's not what the MLS, it's what's actually sold in the last 90 days. Because the way I usually reflect that is I think like an appraiser, okay? And well, Simon, I'm not an appraiser. I know you're not. But think as your way as an appraiser and ask the appropriate questions, okay? Data is one of the most important. Black and white will never lie. It'll tell you exactly what the property sold. And if you do a little bit more research, then you can start comparing, right? Properties are considered like apples to apples, okay? You cannot compare an apple to an orange, right? Or a grape to an apple. You got to look at things from a perspective of what's similar in characteristics. Well, one is the year the home was built, right? If a home was built in 1955, you cannot compare a property to a 2022 new construction.
Actual age.
Okay? Age is a factor.
Actual age, yeah.
The other thing, how do you compare apples to apples? Property that's 1,500 square feet, right? You cannot compare a property that's 2,500 square feet. The property is a lot bigger. You cannot compare that. But a property that's less than 1,500, you can use as part of the comparables. Okay, that's number two.
So functional obsolescence.
Number three, amenities. You cannot compare a property that's a 4-bedroom to a 5-bedroom house, right? It has to be of equal or less, meaning if it's a 4-bedroom or a 3-bedroom, then you can utilize that as part of your comparables, okay? Number 4 is how many bedrooms, how many baths? I think I said that already. Lot size, okay? If a lot size is 20,000, you cannot compare if your potential listing is 5,000.
Exactly.
Not the same, but you can compare properties that are similar in lot size, such as 5,200, 5,500, even pushing 6,000. And the number one thing of all that is the area of the property is what we call the subject property. You should always do an analysis within a 1 mile radius from the subject property, okay? Now, I've been in situations where the property is within multiple cities. Like if you do 1 mile radius, you got one city, a third city. Then it's hard to compare that because we don't usually cross over to that city because there's many scenarios on that.
Yep.
School districts, price points, also hit a big parameter. You can go from one city to the other totally different.
Yep.
You go to downtown and then you go into Beverly Hills, totally different. You go to Pasadena, totally different than what you see here in the South Bay. So you want to stay within the city of that subject property. Okay, so amenities, what upgrades has the seller done to the property? Is it still 1955? Or have they done some upgrades to the property in the last 2-3 years? They redid the kitchen, so that raises the value, right? They did the floors, they painted, they added square footage, okay? So all those you take into consideration when you're analyzing a property. Question?
Can we compare for appraisal like a front footage, like the lot size? We say like, we have to compare as well like a lot size, right? 10,000 square feet to 10,000 square feet or closer to that. But the front footage, like okay, so the property front have like 100 feet, and the depth is like 90 feet. Some property have only like
No,
30 feet front. So it's very.
I don't think you have to worry about that. You're going deep into more of a mentality of a contractor when it comes to the avenues of setbacks. How much can you do the setback on increased square footage? I wouldn't worry about that. I would worry more of the dimensions, the lot size dimensions, right? 150 by 45.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Okay, so it depends on the city. Because like the city of Redondo Beach, that's very important, especially if it's a single family residence, but it's zoned for R2 where you can build a second dwelling. The dimensions is very, very crucial. And you can use that as leverage to say, well, this is the reason I can go up in the value because the dimensions hit the parameter to the one that's a duplex that had 145 over 145 over 50 as an example of the width, right? So yeah, that you can take into consideration. The other consideration, especially like high-end stuff, multi-million-dollar properties where you see a lot of new construction happening. That is also where you utilize, the price per square foot, because the price per square foot will alter how you can navigate a potential listing price. Because if you see a lot of new construction happening, well, now you can utilize that, okay, this property is sold, but you know, you gotta gauge it, because if the buyer is looking at it for future opportunities, or you see it as a value for future opportunities, you can sell it that way, and a buyer will probably hook and buy it because they can see the future value to the property, okay? And there's two comparisons as well. You know, the comparison of the property itself and the land as well, okay? Because there might be in certain, you know, areas that the house is not really worth, but the land value is worth a lot. Manhattan Beach is an example. You know, most of the land there is more expensive than some of the small houses that are there. So general contractors, developers, they buy it for that purpose, because they're going to tear down the house and build up a new construction. So you got to take that also into consideration as well. Make sense?
So essentially, we're just able to compare with a more fine-tooth comb than the algorithm of Zillow.
Oh, 100%.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, absolutely, yes. You know, and the more you do, the better you get at it. You know, in my personal opinion, I think if you know how to crunch numbers, or, you know, utilize the multiple listing, you should be able to analyze a property within, you know, 10 minutes, give or take. Now, most of them are very specific. Most of your homes are cookie cutter, so it's easy to analyze those properties and give a opinion of value. Now, remember, at the end of the day, negotiations, just like appraisal values, it's an opinion, right? It's just an opinion. I can send 3 appraisers to go and analyze the property. Guess what's going to happen? 3 different opinions are going to come. It's an opinion of value. Okay. At the end of the day, who determines the price?
The buyers.
Absolutely. The buyers determine the price. I can say the price is this, right? The seller can say, this is what I want to sell it. But at the end of the day, who dictates? The buyer. The buyer will ultimately, because they'll either buy in and submit an offer or not. You know, so you don't want to be in a position where you're chasing the market because you overlisted the property. And you're only doing it because you were too afraid to battle with the seller. You know what I mean? Okay. You know, and 3 things should happen, in my personal opinion. And I will be very crystal clear. You know, by the end of my presentation, 3 things can happen. Either you'll list with me, you'll decide not to list with me, or I choose not to list the property. And any of those 3 are perfectly fine with me. You know, when you come across very confident in your position, then, you know, the seller knows that you're in it for business. You know, obviously we want to give your client top notch for their home. And that I make very clear. My ultimate goal, if I can give you $10 million, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, by all means, that's my ultimate goal. But I cannot control that. Does that make sense? I have no say-so, but only what I see on the MLS, through county reporters, through other third-party websites to determine what we need to start as a base. Does that make sense? Cool. All right. Any questions?
Sir, if the seller say, okay, I'm not gonna list less than, for example, $1 million, and they're like the price is around this area is like $800,000, not above $800,000, right? So can we take this listing for on $1 million?
Run that by me again. You know that the house is not worth $1 million.
Yeah, it's not over $1 million for sure. Maximum $800,000. We can like go, or we can like
Absolutely, you can list the property to whatever you want. The question is, are you going to babysit that house, or you want to sell the house? Because I'm not in the business of babysitting a house. I'm in the business of selling homes. You know, and if you're not doing your research and your homework, guess what? That property is going to stay on the market, and eventually that property becomes stale. And ultimately, you're going to either lose the listing because it's going to expire, or the seller's going to say to you, Amir, hey, buddy, how come we haven't got any offers? I don't know why. I know why. And other agents are going to see that this property is overpriced. Remember, you don't want to be that agent that they leverage your listing,
Exactly.
okay?
So how do we handle this situation? Like Sarah said, no, I don't want to list this property less than $1 million. We know like this is the only $800,000 home. We can do more than this. And we really need a listing, and there is no buyer for $1 million. And this is no, we just list $1 million, that's fine. So how do we manage this situation?
Well, it's very easy. Again, going back to your skill sets, knowing how to handle objections, right? Being stern and firm in your position. Do you mind putting the sliding door steps? Being stern and firm in your position, right? Mr. and Mrs. Seller, my ultimate goal is to sell this home. You know, and if we overprice it, I'm doing injustice to you. I don't want to be coming back to you and asking for a price reduction because now we're chasing the market. So let's start off from the very beginning. Let's list it at what the value is. We're just below the value because my goal is to get multiple offers. If I can get a bidding war, then, you know, we're going to be able to go up on the price. But if we price the home too high, the property is not going to get any offers. And what are we going to end up doing? We're going to probably ask for a reduction. I don't want to babysit the house, meaning I don't want to have a house that it's not getting any offers because you're not going to be happy with my overall services. My number one goal is to get you top dollars, yes, with the least amount of headaches to net you the most possible. But I cannot do that if we're not being realistic. Now we're living in fantasy world, okay? You don't want to live in fantasy world other than Disneyland, right?
Did you use the babysitting analogy to the client?
I do.
How do they respond usually?
They proactive about it. They were okay with it.
Good.
You know, because again, it all depends on how the conversation starts from the very beginning. But my ultimate goal is to sell the home. And I use babysitting because, again, that's an easy way to grasp their understanding. Like, okay, what does he mean by babysit? Well, babysit is putting the property on the market, but there's no offers. We're just holding on to a property that's active for weeks and weeks and weeks with no tangible consideration or no offers. That's how I see it. So yes, I use that a lot.
I was just curious, because you know, some analogies you just use in the classroom. And some
Well, I
people
use
don't.
cars, I use sports, I use law enforcement as well. I use whatever arsenal.
Sure.
Now, one of the avenues that I approach listing appointments, and top performers will do the same, I try to pick up as much arsenal that I can about the consumer. The minute that I walk into the house, prior to actually physically going inside, I'm already having my radars. What can I identify to break the ice? What can I use in order for me to leverage myself to break the ice? So that way I can ultimately leverage and control the conversation. Okay, maybe they're into sports, maybe they're into planting, you know, fruits and vegetables. Maybe there's something that catches my eye that I can use that as a pillar leverage to start the conversation. Okay, and I do that quite often. You know, I'll either compliment them as well. Maybe they have a very nice watch or jewelry. Okay, or maybe they have something that catches my eye. Like I've been in listing presentations where I see awards. I see that maybe a son or a daughter is in law enforcement. I can relate. Because if you go to my mom's house, they still have stuff there that I said, take that off. That's a long time ago. Oh, we wanted that. You know, that identifies me as a peace officer, right? But that's how I can relate to people. So find a niche and identify and run with it. Because I know we're all a little nervous. Everyone gets a little nervous. I'm telling you from personal experience that even top performers get a little bit of a butterfly because it's still not 100% guaranteed that you're going to walk away with the listing. Okay. And even top performers don't always get the listing. Okay. This is why you got to constantly lead generate, prospecting, right? Going on appointments. Talk to Al, you know, how many appointments does he go on a weekly basis? Does he get them all? No. No, there's sometimes that it's not in alignment. And that's perfectly fine. This is why you gotta constantly go on listing appointments. Make sense?
Yes.
All right, awesome. All right, so use negotiations tips to respond to common points. Let's see, the 3 Ps. All right, so part of the Ignite and negotiating the deals is knowing the 3 elements of the 3 Ps, right? And the 3 Ps is 1, prepare, present, and then your position, right? So I've said this already, you gotta prepare, right? If you're going on a consultation, buyer consultation, you better be prepared with what you're planning to do and say, because there's still not 100% guarantee that they'll work with you. More so when working with a seller. Okay, sellers are a little bit more tricky than buyers. Buyers, you can kind of get away, mess up a little bit, and they still will work with you. Sellers, on the other hand, can be a little bit challenging. Know your shit. We're gonna mute that, by the way, okay? Know your stuff, okay? Know your stuff, because the sellers, believe it or not, they are pretty sophisticated too. They know, especially if they buy and sell, they understand the process. And you don't want to be caught with your pants down because you do not know, okay? You might be able to get away with certain things, but if there's too many errors, too many uncertainty, they'll see right through you, okay? Especially high-end stuff, right? Multi-million-dollar properties, the higher the property value, the more sophisticated they are. Does that mean you cannot pick up a multi-million-dollar listing? No, of course not. Because people will relate with you when they trust you and like you, right? I'd rather work with someone that I feel comfortable. Well, maybe you're not, haven't done much sales, but you know what? You look like a hard worker, that you are looking at my best interest. Therefore, I will give you the opportunity. That someone that says, I closed 100 transactions in the last 6 months. You know where I'm going with this, right?
So
They may not have the time to really, cater to your needs and wants. So knowing how to navigate that approach. Question.
okay, so is there any contingencies? So how do we handle, and like there are the different kind of contingencies, so
How do you handle different types of contingencies?
yeah, if we go to the listing appointment and there is some contingencies pop up, so how do we know? Because
Well, this is why 3 things you must know, and I've said this many, many, many times, and I'll say it again. You gotta learn contracts, you gotta learn negotiations, and you gotta learn objection handlers. Write that down, put it somewhere, embed it, tattoo it in your chest, I don't know. Just remember that. 3 things, okay? Number one, learn contracts. Learn the purchase agreement inside and out. Learn the listing agreement inside and out. Learn all the disclosures. Eventually, you'll pick it up. Now, does that mean you got to know every element of every paragraph? No. Okay. And I'm going to show you a sample that I'll email it to you as well. The number, well, take that back. 10 things that you should be looking for on the purchase agreement. Okay. Because remember, when you alter the RPA, you're putting yourself in a liability. The contracts are there to protect you as the buyer's agent, to protect the listing agent as well, and all the parties involved, buyer and the seller. Okay, well, learn the contracts, learn negotiations, because remember, it's a finesse. If you're working with a buyer and you're now in a situation of multiple offers on the property they want, how do you wiggle your way to the top? Conversations with the listing agent, asking the right questions. Communications is the ultimate win that will give you at least 1 foot in. Can't promise your offer is going to be accepted, because it depends on price, terms, and conditions. What are you offering? What are the terms? What are you willing to do? And I'm speaking from a buyer's perspective. Because if the buyer is lowballing on a seller's market, their offer is never going to be considered. It will not even be responded it'll be rejected. Make sense?
Yes.
Okay, then, negotiations, and then ultimately handling objections. When a buyer says this, when a seller says this, how do you handle those objections? Learn those three, and I promise you, everything else will align, okay? Everything else will align. And I have top performers in the 8 years I've been with the company that are doing it at a high level because they listen, okay? Go there and ask them, it's tattooed, because I tell them, put that in your arm, in your back, somewhere that you can go back and just know, okay, contracts, negotiations, and objection handlers. Okay, those three. All the marketing and everything else, all the systems will come into play, but know those three fundamentals. Does that make sense? Prepare and learn. Know your goals, know your clients, think ahead, set clear expectations, be informed, obey the laws, right? Do the right thing. Know the documents inside and out. All right. I think most of those we kind of understand, right? Know the contracts from the inside and out. How I prepared is I use my previous life and how I started learning the contracts. I would have samples of everything, sample of the listing agreement that I filled out, or I took someone else and saw, okay, this is how you do it. And then I had a 3-ring binder, and then I would put it in my 3-ring binder. Purchase agreement. Okay, how do you fill out a purchase agreement? Boom. Commercial purchase agreement. Boom. Residential purchase agreement. Vacant land purchase agreement. Boom. Put it all into a 3-ring binder. Or start a folder as well. Your computers are very sophisticated. You can create folders and just throw everything. This is all my learning tools. And then you can break them into folders, purchase agreement, listing agreements, addendums, disclosures, all the wazoo forms that we have. Practice, 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 right? That way you can reference and go back. Okay, I don't remember how to fill out a purchase agreement. When it comes to income producing properties that are 4 units or less, then you can use the RIPA, right? The residential purchase agreement. And then I have a sample, okay, boom, 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 boom. When you see it, then you know how to prepare these forms, okay? Don't go guessing, because you may miss something, and that ultimately will lead to a potential liability. We don't want to be there, right? Never, never, never. So, again, preparing for, the elements of negotiation starts with these examples here. Know your goal. What is your goal here? Okay, obviously know your client. Do you really know your client's needs and wants? Are you diving deep in the conversation to really resonate what they're telling you? Or are you just going through the motion? Think ahead, right? How do you prepare and position yourself to make sure that you at least have an opportunity? Because I don't want to spend 4 or 5 months showing property to the same buyer, okay? Know those expectations right off the bat, ladies and gentlemen. Know what their needs and wants are, and then anchor that and go find that specific property. Make sense? Okay. Prepare, position, and present. Prepare, present, and position. Asking questions is the key to gaining information to win in negotiations, right? I mean, there's so many books out there on negotiations. You can go to YouTube too as well. That's where I get a lot of my information is how do you navigate a negotiation, okay? Remember, at the end of the day, it's not the strong arm effect, right? I'm gonna be better, I'm gonna win this. No, no. Look at it from all angles, from the opposing agents to the opposing client. Because if you look at it just from yourself or your client's self, that's good, but that doesn't mean that they see the same vision as you. But if you're in communications with the opposing agent, right, then you can understand his or her client's position as well. What is their ultimate goal as well? Because it's very easy to get yourself in a tangle and then the deal stops And now we're either canceling, and now we're back to square one. I don't want to do that. I want to close deals left and right and move on to the next client. But if you have a lot of walls that you're hitting, a lot of challenges, something is missing in your arsenal of tools. Okay. So open-ended questions that have unlimited response options. What additional information should I know? What is important about closing in 30 days? How do you feel about that? Close-end questions that expect a specific response, often yes or no or one word. Do you have to sell your home by a specific date? Do you have any other offers? What is the bottom line price willing to consider? Okay, look at it from those two different perspectives, the open and then the close. All these are all great. Ask a lot of questions, right? More questions will get you to the end goal. Okay, what the buyer wants and what the seller wants. Yes, sir.
So in terms of the price, what do you personally do in terms of negotiating with the, if you're representing the buyer, how would your dialogue look like with the selling agent?
Well, let's role play. Tell me more. So you're the buyer, I'm the agent. You're asking me a specific question. What's that question?
So the bottom line price you would consider, what would I say, like,
So if the property is listed, let's say for 800,000, okay? Now I'm gonna look at many variables. One, I'm gonna see, how long the property's been on the market. Property's been on the market just 2 days. So that's gonna tell me a whole different parameter than a property 32 days in.
Yeah.
Make sense? Okay. So that's number one. I'm looking at the information. Two, I'm also looking at the photos of the property. How's the property look? Is it an immaculate move-in condition? All the bells and whistles, just a beautiful home. I'm going to take that into consideration because not just your buyer loves that home, but 10 other buyers may love that home too. So I might be in competition. So that's something that I'm thinking as I'm going and explaining that to the buyer. Because I want the buyer to get the property, but I also have to be realistic. And if they're not realistic, then it's going to alter me from getting my offer accepted. And if you have the buyers control that, guess what? You're going to lose this battle all the time. Get those, set those expectations right off the bat. And if they are not willing to bend, maybe these buyers are not for you. And it's okay to release them. Okay, there's good people out there that are willing to work for you. Okay. If they don't see your vision and your professionalism, why are you working with them? You're just putting strain and stress in your own self, and you're end up possibly still losing the buyer. So know how to mirror and adapt to that. But going back to your question, I look at all those elements too. And then I also know, what the buyer's budget is. I want to know where they're comfortable. Because even though they may qualify for $1 million, right? Does that mean they want to go all the way to $1 million? Probably not. Probably not. So hit those expectations. Where are you comfortable, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer? When you know those expectations, now you know how to maneuver yourself for success. I will also do comparables. Well, let me check, that the agent lists the property in accordance to the area. Or is this agent out of area that does not know the local market? Because here in the South Bay, ladies and gentlemen, it's a different environment than outside of South Bay. Okay. Big difference. Yeah, big difference. And if an agent doesn't know the area, they're not going to know how to appropriately evaluate a home. And that property may be way below market or way above market. Okay, so do your homework, research it as well. Then also, hold on a second. Let me call you right back. Then also, ask a lot of questions. Okay, find out all the ins and outs of the seller. Okay? When you know the seller's position, that you can position yourself in how you draft these offers. That's negotiation in itself. Literally. Ask those questions. Well, Mr. Agent, you know, we want to be in the ballpark. What is your seller needing from this offer? Price, terms, conditions, rent back. Tell me a little bit more of your seller, so that way we're not spinning our wheels. I know exactly how to draft this, so it'll be a clean offer to your client's expectations.
Yeah, so that's what I was thinking, we just asked what they want in terms of the indices and all that stuff. So
Absolutely.
dialogue with them. So
If they want a fast closing, right? Well, Simon, my clients need to sell this property like tomorrow. Can you do a fast closing? Okay, well, tell me a little bit more. What does that look like? How much time do they need? Okay, 25, 15 days? Because that can alter your position as well. You might not be able to close in 15 days. That's where you need to start communicating with the lender. Hey, I need a fast closing. Can you expedite this? Because the seller wants a fast closing. Okay. Again, going back to setting those expectations. All right. Maybe the seller needs time. They're buying a new property, they're ready to retire, but they're buying something out of state, right? And they need another 30 days, 35 days, 40 days. Can we accommodate the sellers as well? And if that's the case, this is the conversation I'm going to be talking to the buyer as well, saying, in order for our offer to be considered, I'm not saying to be accepted, but to be considered, you know, here's what the seller's guidelines are. Are you okay with it? Because I'm not buying the property, folks. I'm not making your mortgage. I want to make sure that you're comfortable when we submit this offer. Because once our offer gets considered and negotiations back and forth on counters and finally gets accepted, I want to make sure that you are 100% that this is your property. We don't want any hiccups because we need to close this deal. Make sense?
Can you go over rent back real quick?
No, I can't. I don't have a recorder. Once I say it, I lose it. It's just that's the way my brain functions. But I think we are recording this.
Oh, he was just saying, can you cover rent back, what it
Yeah,
means?
Oh, that's what you meant. I thought you meant like say what I said.
Oh, no, no.
Oh, so yeah, you can do a rent back. So what do you mean?
What
Be more
what is
specific.
that, like, I guess an overview of it?
Oh, so basically what a rent back or seller in possession means that, let's say that it's a 30-day escrow, right? We close in 30 days. But the seller needs to stay in possession because they don't have anywhere else to go until their next purchase is available. But instead of moving them out in 30 days, they stay in possession of the property for X amount of time after close. So once it closes, the deal is officially the buyer's.
Yeah.
So the seller, technically speaking, is not considered a tenant because the buyer is now the owner of the place. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's when we say seller in possession or rent back. When we say a rent back is that the tenant, who is the seller, becomes more like a renter. And now the tenant will pay the landlord, or in this case, the buyer, rent to stay after close of escrow. That's what we call it.
Okay, that makes sense.
Are they usually making that transaction after, or is it kind of lumped into the agreement at,
It depends.
could be both?
Yeah, I mean, if I was proactive, I would get that even before submission of the offer.
Yeah.
Is the seller asking for a rent back? Because right now it's so hard to get offers accepted. So I would be asking the listing agent from the very beginning, is the seller needing, you know, a seller in possession after close of escrow? What does that look like? Because sometimes we can bend a little bit and do it as a freebie, saying the seller doesn't have to pay a rent back. We'll do it as good faith for you, at least giving us the opportunity to open escrow.
Sweeten the offer.
Yeah, sweeten the offer, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, but I've seen situations with alters, and that was never agreed upon in the very beginning. And now in the midst of the escrow, right? Now the listing agent saying, oh my gosh, the deal fell apart on my client's upland. We got to start all over, but it looks like the seller is going to need some time. Can we negotiate a rent back for 30 days? Okay, not a problem, you know. So it's negotiations anytime. I've seen scenarios too, guys. My phone is just blowing up today. Sorry about that. I've seen scenarios where at the almost end, 3 to 5 days prior to closing, now we have Houston, we have a problem where the deal falls apart on the seller. And now we're scrambling to try to make this work. It all really depends. There's so many variables because that far into escrow, the buyer may not be in the position to allow this because they're moving out of their place. They already gave notice and they need to move into the property as soon as possible. So, you know, again, it's knowing to be very proactive from the very beginning. It's my way of seeing it. Does that make sense? Okay, cool. Any questions regarding the open-end question or close-end question? What would happen if helps you anticipate the next step of the negotiation? What is the importance to you? Why is this important to you? Helps you gain more information and gain more insights. Absolutely, you know, and again, it goes back to the 3 Ps: preparing, presenting, and obviously the position, you know, preparing for the conversation before anything. And then the presentation aspect of it, how are you presenting that when you are representing the buyer, right? Making that connection with the listing agent. I want to know the listing agent, and because you're going to be in a relationship for at least 30 days. I want to know that I can work well with that agent because the number 1 and number 2 goal here is satisfy my client, but ultimately be able to work with the agent to close the deal. Because if there's no meeting of the mind with that other agent, it's going to be a tough transaction. You may go through it and close it, but it may be tough if you're not in constant dialogue and communications. Stay in communication through every aspect of that process, and believe me, it'll be a win-win. Because now if you need a little bit of bending, right, or you need extra time, you cannot release loan contingency, you need to extend that. But because you have great rapport with the listing agent, the listing agent will fight for you and have that conversation with the seller. It's like, look, you know, they've been great. You know, Cheyenne has been awesome through the entire process. The buyers came to a little hurdle. They're asking for 7 days of an extension to release the loan contingency. You know, I think we should be okay. So the listing agent is your ambassador too if you're in constant communication. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks. I know you're.
Prepare, do, purpose, ask questions to clarify and set clear expectations. Read the scenario on page 9, the 3 Ps, prepare and do. Circle and underline the key areas in which you need more information, or certainly before you can confidently negotiate on your client's behalf. Write 3 specific questions you would ask your clients in the space. Record any ahas as you go through the process. So pay attention to verbal and nonverbal cues. Keep quiet once you present an offer. Listen carefully to what it is important to the other party. Stay calm and relax. Okay. I think out of all that is probably the number 1 in my opinion. Stay calm and relax. I've seen so many agents get hysterical. Oh my God, it's like the house is on fire, you know, emergency. And it's just because the listing agent sent a notice to perform. Well, the notice to perform, if you understand, you still have time. But, you know, the agents go so deep into their situation that they're not calm and relaxed, okay? The last thing you don't want is to lose your shit, okay? Stay calm and relaxed. You have the support here. You have the backing. Bring it to my attention. My goal and my job is to see things from the outside looking in, where some agents see things from the inside looking out. We have a bigger perspective and understanding and how we can help you navigate the process, okay? Don't worry, we got this together. Ask what and how, questions example, buyer wants to close in 60 days. Seller wants to close in 30 days. Mr. and Mrs. Sellers, your request a 30-day closing. What's important about closing in 30 days, right? Let's think about that for a minute. The importance of asking tons of questions. Because let's say that you don't ask the questions, you submit an offer of 30 days, right? But there's another offer because the buyer's agent reached out to Cheyenne. Cheyenne, hey, what is it that your seller needs? Well, the seller needs 60 days. Okay, no problem. We're going to put that in the offer. The buyer's okay with that and submits an offer. But because we didn't do our due diligence, right? We didn't ask the right questions. That offer can be put here when it should have been here for counters. You're going to be on a multiple counter, but I'd rather be where it's going to be multiple counter offers instead of a rejection because you did not ask questions. Does that make sense? So always go through the motions when you're looking at property, right? And your buyers love the place and want to submit an offer, that you're immediately calling the listing agent and asking those crucial questions. How many offers do you have? What is the highest offer you currently have? When is the seller going to either acknowledge or counter or accept? I want to know. Most of those questions should be answered by the listing agent. And guess what? I've seen scenarios and situations where the listing agent will say, well, I can't tell you how many offers. Okay. Well, I can't tell you what the highest offer. Well, we don't know yet when we're going to present offers. Okay.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
Okay, so is that like legally we can ask them and legally he have to respond rightly, or he shouldn't be tell them like a highest offer or something? Or is that just depend on like listing understanding? Like it's legal to disclose the highest offer?
Absolutely. Again, going back to understanding the contracts. If you understand the contract, you know that on the listing agreement, it says that if asked direct question to the listing agent, how many offers you have, the listing agent must provide that. Now, under certain requirements, meaning under the direction of the seller in writing says, Amir, I am instructing you not to divulge that information. You will not tell any agent or anyone what the highest offer or how many offers I have. Under those directions, then by all means, you don't disclose. Then you position yourself when an agent is asking those questions. Well, I've been authorized not to divulge that information per the seller's request.
But unless you have that in writing, then you are required to answer the direct question that's asked of you? Oh, see, I
Yes.
feel like a lot of people are doing business thinking that they have the choice of how they want to play that.
Nope.
Interesting.
If a direct question, Cheyenne, is asked upon you, then specifics, yeah, you must divulge that. 100%.
Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, and a lot of agents unfortunately don't understand that because they don't know the contracts.
Yeah.
But the listing agreement, if you read the listing agreement, I don't know what paragraph it is, but it says there in black and white.
Interesting.
Yeah, it says that if an agent tells you a direct question on how many offers and what the highest offer, you will divulge that information.
Interesting.
Okay, again, knowing the leverage, leveraging yourself and understanding. That's why when you know the contracts, most of the time you're going to win. And I've seen that. That's why some attorneys are good and some attorneys are mediocre because they understand the law.
Yes.
And when you understand the contracts, believe me, you win because there's no way around it. And I've been in battles and arguments with other brokers and managers and agents. No, look at paragraph 33, subsection B. Okay, and I'll use creative ways of approaching that. And there's no way around it. They'll go back and reference, and then they'll make up all these crazy excuses, but the contract is the contract.
Yes.
It's in black and white. That's why you gotta understand these contracts. Now, I'm gonna share with you, I know I'm a little over my time. Are you guys okay?
Yes, beautiful.
Okay, but in essence, all this is all great stuff, but real life scenarios, in my personal opinion, are the best. And I can share so many different war stories that I've been involved with, of, transactions, because I was a compliance officer for many, many years. And my job was just looking at contracts every day and, approving them or declining them or rejecting them. So I got to see, what agents do left and right. And sometimes I would do this, like, oh no, he or she did that. But that's just, again, the difference from a true professional and someone that's not a true professional, okay? All right, so let's just skip all this stuff for right now. Okay, so let me share something with you real quick. Contacts added, conversations day, handwriting notes, home prepares, script, lead gen, uncover motivation, identify objections. Okay, this is cool. So again, we always talk to you, and I remember as a newly licensed agent, not knowing anything about real estate. I didn't learn scripts first. I learned pick up the phone and make calls. Pick up the phone and make calls. I remember when I started my first day, I was in a suit and tie and I had a briefcase thinking I was this, oh, okay, I'm gonna crush it in real estate. And I go in there, speak with the owner broker of the company, and he says, that's your desk there. It's not assigned to you, but that's gonna be your desk. And then he had one of the managers bring me a list, which was paperwork like this, put it on my desk. And my number one job was to make calls. And these were all seller contacts. I didn't know scripts, just asked to see if they want to list their homes. So did I mess up? Heck yeah. But it gave me the confidence, right? The more rejections, the more no's, eventually I started tweaking, I started asking, and I started looking at other performers. How are you doing it at a high level? How do you generate the leads? How do you get non-motivated buyers or sellers into motivated sellers? Identifying, again, as we said earlier, all the objections. The number one goal is obviously to close the deal because that's when we get paid, okay? But out of everything is building the confidence, right? You gotta have that confidence. And if you don't have the confidence, you're gonna question yourself and you're gonna put limited beliefs in your head every single time. Well, I don't feel comfortable. I just don't think I can do it. They're gonna say no. They're gonna hang up on me. They're gonna tell me to go pencil sound, whatever the case may be. You start throwing things in your head. Just do it. Mess up. And believe me, it'll come back and you'll be more comfortable, more confident, and you're going to be able to close more appointments. Okay, any questions regarding this? 30 minutes role playing generation, update contacts and follow-ups. We're not going to role play, command and obviously create success. Okay, let me share with you something real quick. All right, here are the 10 essential elements of a purchase agreement, okay? Once you understand, and if you want a copy of this, I'll be more than happy to email it to you. Just send me a request and I'll be more than happy to give it to you. I'm not gonna go, through the entire, but it just, to identify some of the 10 most important elements on the purchase agreement. All right, well, obviously identifying the parties involved, okay? Who are the buyers and who are the seller, which is very important. If you don't know, then you need to ask, okay? Well, I don't know my clients, okay? You better ask before you submit an offer because that's going on the purchase agreement. Remember, all this stuff eventually is public information. If you're ever in a potential liability or lawsuit, attorneys, judges, everyone is gonna see all the paperwork that was involved in the transaction. You wanna make sure that you have all your ducks in a row, right? Because you don't wanna be that agent that messed it up. And now you put yourself in a situation you just don't wanna be. Ask a lot of questions, all right? So identify the parties to the property, okay? Who are the buyers, who are the sellers? Yes, Diane?
When you're doing zip forms, and it might just be a personal preference thing, do you prefer to add the parties in via the parties tab or the cover sheet?
Both.
Okay,
Yeah, I would put both.
okay.
I would identify them in the cover sheet
Mhm.
and obviously on the purchase agreement, because the escrow company, they're going to base everything based on what was agreed upon on the purchase agreement.
Mhm.
So make sure that the names are correct, and if you don't have the correct name, ask,
Mhm.
okay? Because maybe they go by their maiden name instead of their marriage name, right? So we need to know that, because that's how they're gonna retain title. Now, we can clean it all up when we're in escrow, but do it from the very beginning. That'll solve so many delays and headaches during the process. Okay, good question, by the way.
So, okay.
Yes, go ahead.
So I have a question, like, how do we get a listing agreement? For example, there is a listing agent, right?
Mhm.
And I wanna know about the terms and conditions between the seller and the listing agent. There should be a listing contract, right? So can we access that contract clearly? Can we ask them, can you please?
No, you're not gonna be able to get the listing agreement information. No.
Like a terms and.
I would not, if I was the listing
Uh-huh.
agent, right? And Keller Williams is the listing company, right?
Mhm.
We, as the brokerage, have and own the listing, not the individual agent. You may go out and list the property, but at the end of the day, the brokerage owns the listing.
Exactly.
Okay, hold one thought. The company owns the listing. We don't divulge that information to any buyer agent, because what if the terms are different, commissions are different?
Mhm.
Yeah, we listed the property for 6%, right, total, but on the listing agreement, we're only compensating 2.5%, and we're keeping 0.5%. That the seller's fine. We don't want to divulge that information, because now the buyer's agent is going to say, well, why are you getting 3.5 and I'm only getting 2.5? Which 2.5 is pretty standard, but you see where I'm going with this. It opens up a dialogue I just don't want to be.
Yeah.
So if it's not being subpoenaed by an attorney, then we don't ever provide the listing agreement to the opposing agent. That's yours, that's confidential.
Exactly. That's and like why I was thinking about that, because the terms and conditions, not about the percentage of commission, like the if there is a contingency or something, like they say, like you cannot disclose the higher offer, how many offers, it should be in agreement, right? In terms and conditions.
Absolutely.
To know that terms and conditions, that was the only purpose. If they provide us the terms and conditions, if not, if whatever they can take 2%, 4%. It's not my concern.
Well, it really depends on your seller, okay?
Uh-huh.
And this is where you have to understand all elements of your position. Being a good listener, understanding your client's position. Is it something that they need a fast closing, or is it something that there's no urgency? Because that will alter how you're going to be getting offers, right? And how you're going to counter these offers. Because if the seller needs to sell a property as soon as possible, because they need to move on to their next home because of a job transfer, then we're going to set those expectations right off the bat from the counter offer or the conversation I'm having with the buyer's agents. You know, these are the conditions. We need you to tighten up those conditions. Can I give you 17 days for loan contingency, but only 10 days, setting those expectations. Now, at the end, the buyer's going to try to fish, right? But ultimately, you know, the buyer's ultimate goal is to hook the seller and open escrow. But the seller will not get hooked if it doesn't fall under the parameters of what the seller's requests are.
Mhm.
That's where you, as the listing agent, have to put those barriers and understanding on counter offers. The seller is asking for the highest best. The seller is asking from a 30-day escrow, maybe 20-day escrow. The seller is asking to reduce all your contingencies from 17 days to 12 days, including loan contingencies. The seller is asking, instead of putting $10,000 deposit, to put, $30,000 deposit. Okay. It could also be the finance, you're having a conventional loan with 10% down, but another offer with 20% down. Those are all the elements the seller's going to consider, because someone that has more skin in the game, right, will be most likely to close the deal because there's reinsurance. Some of the categories on the finance is cash, conventional, FHA, and VA loans. Obviously, cash is golden because there's really so many red tapes that you eliminate. You don't even have to do an appraisal because it's cash. You don't have the mercy of the underwriter and all the terms and conditions that the underwriter requests, because that can alter the buyer from ultimately getting approved for a loan. So again, but that cash can also be a price that the seller is not willing to entertain, because they say, well, it's cash, we can offer something a little less, right?
Right.
So there's many variables to that as well. I hope that kind of answers your question. Obviously, when an offer gets submitted, the earnest deposit, if you're putting $1 or $100,000, that will alter that buyer's position, right? The more skin in the game, obviously, the more favorable that the seller will look at that, okay? Now, if you understand deposit, you understand that it's a deposit that can be returned back to the buyer under certain guidelines, okay? This is why you got to understand the purchase agreement, because the answers to all those questions are on the RPA. Read the contract. The buyer, once releases all contingencies, now exposes their buyer deposit. If the buyer doesn't go through with the purchase of the home, they're exposing and jeopardizing their deposit. The seller may go after the entire deposit. Okay, so you got to understand how to navigate that and explain that to the buyer, because the first thing I hear with buyers is, am I going to lose the deposit if we get this offer accepted? No. There's certain things that must happen in order for the buyer to release that deposit to the seller. But once that is released, then it's exposing, and if the seller feels they were damaged, then yeah, the seller can go after that deposit. That's the whole purpose of having money. Who's going to make an offer with no deposit in place, right? Will you accept an offer if a buyer is not willing to put a little skin in the game? He's tying up the property for 30 to 45 days. Why wouldn't you, right? Yes, sir.
And even how, just to let you know, I don't want to be rude.
Oh, yeah, no worries, no worries. We're almost done, folks. Items included and excluded. Also understand that what is included and what is not included with the property, all right? Maybe it's that pole in the bedroom, right? It's like, okay, maybe that pole is staying with the property you're going. You need to be very specific, right? Or maybe that spa, is it staying or going with the property? All right, maybe there's furniture that the seller is willing to leave. Be very specific on what's staying and what's not staying in the property, okay? Obviously, the contingencies, okay? Contingencies are very, very important, because there's inspection contingency, appraisal contingency, finance contingency, title contingencies, disclosure contingencies. All these are elements that the buyer needs to know and understand, that they acknowledge, understand, and are willing to release these conditions. Otherwise, the seller can say, look, if you're not willing to release, then we're going to send a notice for you to release. And if you don't, then we have the right to cancel, or the buyer has the right to cancel if the buyer doesn't feel compelled to any of these terms. Maybe the inspection has so many issues with the home and the buyer just feels compelled, it's just going to cost me too much money, I'd rather back out now. They're within their contingency period to back out of the deal. But know how to negotiate that from a buyer's agent to a seller's agent, because it's both of you finessing this dance together. Make sense? Okay. And obviously disclosures, right? Price and terms, right? Again, going back, Is this a cash offer, a conventional with a large down payment? Is this an FHA with a minimum 3.5%? Is it a VA loan with 0 down, 0 closing costs? All those elements will determine where your seller will be, you know, so understand the mortgage and again, navigating the counter offers as well. Dates and closing costs, right? What is the specific that the buyer and seller want to accomplish? Is both buyer and seller good with 30 days? Or is the seller need extra time? Or the buyer need extra time? There's many elements. Again, know those and iron those out immediately so there is no issue, no questions whatsoever. Terms of possession, right? What happens after? Is the buyer going to move immediately? Is the buyer going to move 3 days after close? Or is the buyer going to allow the seller to stay in possession for 30, 40 days after close of escrow? Know those avenues. Defaults, okay? There's defaults on the sellers and defaults on the buyer. If someone defaults, then they're in breach of the contract. How do you maneuver and how do you navigate that approach? If the buyer is not releasing contingency, the default goes to the seller. Seller says, look, if you're not willing to release, we're going to send a notice because we want to put this property back on the market and find another buyer. You're in default of this agreement. Therefore, you either go forward or release something or we cancel. And that also goes for the seller as well. The seller may also be in a position of default. You know, if we were scheduled to close in 30 days and, you know, the seller didn't give us any direction that they were going to stay longer and that was never agreed upon, the seller has defaulted. You know, if the seller has not given us the time to do all of our due diligence and inspections because they just don't want to show the property, the seller is in default, the buyer may have the right to cancel. So it's a back and forth, and this is where conversations are very crucial regarding the opposing agent. Okay, obviously the signatures, each party, who is going to be the buyers, who are the sellers? Remember, if you're getting a listing appointment and there's 2 sellers, but you only get 1 listing signature for 1 party, you don't have a valid agreement. You want to make sure that all parties on the listing agreement are in there because you don't want to waste time. You want to make sure that all the parties are there at the listing presentation. All the buyers are there that are buying the property. So that way there's no misunderstanding and then there's no fault down the line and this deal falls apart. Okay, any questions to the 10 essential elements of the purchase agreement? If you want a copy of this, I'll be more than happy to give you this copy. Just send me an email. Whew, that was a lot of information. I know, but I really appreciate you all for hanging in there. So any final questions before we close for the afternoon? Anyone on Zoom? Okay. Well, then that concludes our negotiations Ignite program. So appreciate you all. Thank you very much. And I will see you on the next Ignite class. I believe the next instructor will be talking about the win-wins, if I remember correctly. Okay, thanks again. Appreciate you all. Have a phenomenal and a productive week. Thank you. Pam. Okay.
Nice. I have a random question actually,
Sure.
as far as staging goes.
Yeah.
Are you asking, if you're the listing agent, are you asking them if they choose to go with staging, are you asking how they like the home staged, or is that pretty much between you as the agent and the stager?
Typically, the sellers will want the guidance and advice of the agent
Okay.
because we see a lot of properties.
Mhm.
If they have an eye and they have their own way and ideas,
Mhm.
then they can ultimately get their own staging company to stage their house.
That's true.
But usually what happens is if they're asking us, is they want our guidance on how that staging should look like,
Okay,
you know, so there's many variables on that.
okay,
Yeah, and I've seen it both ways. They ask, sellers will ask, well, you know, I know I have dated furniture here, but I'd love your opinion in how this house should be staged.
and it's okay to give that opinion, because I feel like that'll be a strong suit of mine,
Yeah,
because I love
absolutely,
interior design, like,
Yeah.
love it, always have, but,
absolutely.
okay,
Yeah,
Okay.
that's part of your marketing.
Okay.
You know, that's part of our arsenal of tools that we can use because that can sell the property for a lot more
yeah,
than having a property that is not staged.
Yeah.
And usually staging works well when the house is dated,
Mhm.
but they have so much clutter in the house, old furniture, remove everything, let me stage it.
Mhm.
And that usually gets more people interested in submitting offers.
And are you pretty often offering them real staging versus virtual staging these days, giving them an option, or?
Well, I would caution, virtual, because we have to also disclose on the MLS that it's a virtual staging, there is no furniture, because they'll go in there and say, wait, what? There's nothing here.
Oh, that happened to me, and when I was co-hosting, I was just like, I walked in and I was like, this isn't what I saw online at all.
Yeah, right.
And even I felt betrayed, you know what I mean? So I can't imagine walking in to see the house after you've seen it online, being like, what the fuck?
Yeah, exactly. So you want to definitely disclose, but it's really budget,
Mhm,
what the seller is willing to, handle.
mhm,
Some will include it as part of their marketing.
mhm,
I know there's agents that have staging companies,
mhm,
and I know there's some agents that even have furniture
mhm.
that they use to stage their home. But we also have the, KW Concierge as a platform for staging purposes if your clients want to. And that would be obviously out of pocket of the seller. Sometimes agents will eat some of the costs, either part of their commission, but I would put some type of disclaimer, we'll see, some type of disclaimer that if the listing gets canceled and no fault to the listing agent,
Yeah,
that you at least recoup, the money you put into, because that can be, in the thousands.
yeah. Did I misunderstand that then? I thought the concierge came out of escrow if
Correct.
it comes to close.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
Typically, if you use the concierge, yeah, it comes out of the seller's proceeds.
Mhm,
But there's agents that have third-party stagers. Now, all those should always be directed to the seller, but I've seen where sellers will say, well, my previous agent staged the property and they didn't charge me anything. So you gotta be very careful if you're going to have a little skin in the game,
mhm,
that if you're gonna front the cost,
mhm.
you'll make it obviously in the commission, then that you disclose to the seller that if in any reason it gets canceled or expired, you at least are able to get compensated, reimbursed for that cost, because it can be anywhere from 3,000 to 5,000, depending on the size and what you're doing to the house.
Sure. I mean,
Yeah,
furniture and rugs, that's not cheap.
exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, it's pretty, but it's not cheap.
No.
So,
I love it. I would love to do that in another life.
you're right. Yeah, I can see you doing that as well.
Oh, I love it. It's like my favorite